in light of the Parakim in Tanya that we are learning recently, starting from Mem Aleph, Mem Beis, now we're up to already Mem Zayin, maybe. Mem Vav, where are we now? Mem Vav or Mem Zayin? I'm referring to the Tanya portion that we learn daily in Chitas. And there's a very interesting Nekuda that seems to be the theme that runs through these Parakim. It's a theme that we find in other places in Tanya, but it stands out very much in these last few Parakim. And I was thinking that a good way to approach it is by using a model from quantum physics. So today's shiur is going to be the neshama and quantum physics. Everybody ready? Put on your neshama hat and your quantum physics hat. And here we go. Okay. So before I start, let me just tell you what is the nekuda that I'm focusing on. What is the point? What's the idea? There's a certain quintessential idea that seems to be running through, especially the last few prakim of Tanya, that, like I said, starting from Perek Mem Aleph, in reference to the neshama, okay? And the idea is that this neshama is another dimension of a yid, okay? It's a dimension. It's an elusive dimension. It's not one that you could point to easily with the consciousness that the capacity of the consciousness that we are now functioning, right, as human beings, and neshama in a body. And even though that body has this interesting thing called consciousness, but the consciousness is, at least we're experiencing it within the context of the realm of the physical reality. Okay. There could be a whole different lecture on consciousness, by the way. It's a very intriguing subject. Very intriguing
Next week,
subject.
Hashem.
I'm sorry?
Next week.
Yeah, whatever. And when I say it's very intriguing, is because let me start first of all with a certain foundation here. Foundation, something that we find that the Rebbe alludes to in various places, in different letters, and that is that there is no contradiction between science and the belief in Hashem and whatever else, right? There is no contradiction. The basis for the Rebbe's statement is that it starts with, a certain axiom, and that is that the Torah is truth, okay? So it's not about proving that the Torah is true. It's about, this is our emunah. Our emunah is, we're starting from that place. Our emunah is that the Torah is true. And we're starting off from a certain axiom, and the fact that we're starting with an axiom does not in any way reduce the validity of this approach, because it has been argued by many philosophers and scientists that everything begins with an axiom, okay? So this is the axiom that we're choosing. We choose the axiom that the Torah is true, okay? It's the absolute truth. Now, science is the search for truth, okay? So says the Rebbe that if science is the search for truth, if we truly believe that the Torah is true, then whatever is happening in science are incremental it's an incremental progression towards truth, right? So we start with an absolute truth. Science is attempting to reach the truth. And every time something becomes established as a reality that is supported by this scientific evidence, right? So that's another step. It's an incremental step towards the truth of Torah. And ultimately, what we believe, and maybe this is like something about the Yosef Mashiach, and the Yosef Mashiach, finally science will have come to its conclusion, and it will merge with the truth of Torah. Now, based on this idea, right, you can watch how you can either just ignore science, right? I have my truth. I don't need science. I could ignore science. It's not a good approach, certainly not according to the Rebbe, based on some very fundamental ideas about Emunah that was pretty much, advocated by the Baal Shem Tov, right? That there's only one Hashem, right? And therefore, if you have to ignore something in order for Hashem to, sit well in your mind, then that's not the oneness of Hashem. That's not Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Okay, so that approach to just ignore the science, right, and then because I already have my absolute truth, then that's not necessarily the proper approach. It's not the proper approach. Why? Because you left out, a whole element of reality that's not included in this truth. On the other hand, though, when you do include science, right, so you have to start with the foundation that the absolute truth is Torah. And amazing things happen. Science is constantly not necessarily conforming with the truth of Torah. Science is providing models, right, that are basically based on the same abstract idea that the truths of Torah is, okay? That's what science is. And what's interesting, if you watch science, you don't have to be, nowadays, you don't have to be a scientist or have any, degree in any of the sciences, because there's so much that's out there for the just regular schmoes like myself, and there's always, if whatever, if you have some kind of a feed, whatever, from some news or some, right, you're constantly being exposed to new developments, new discoveries in science, and especially now with this telescope, wow, all kinds of wows, in science. And then you step back and and this is what I experience, that almost every single advance in science, albeit an incremental advance, it enhances my emunah, literally, because wow, here's another model about something that I already know. I know this from Chassidus in a different context. But that model that science is using or science is discovering, right, fits so well with the things that I already accept and believe. Okay, I find this amazing because I'm never disappointed. There almost never has there ever been something new in science. I didn't say, "Wow, I can use that again to enhance my emunah in Hashem." Okay, so let me give you one example and how it ties in with the last few prokim of Tanya and the Jewish neshama. Okay. One of the things about science and how they move slowly towards a deeper understanding and a deeper truth, so but as it may be, right, is to make observations. Obviously, we're making observations, right? And then, like for example, we'll create certain mathematical models that explain that observation. There's a phenomenon, and then we have a mathematical model. We take that mathematical model, right, and we take it to its full conclusion, right? And if you do that, you come up with what's called a theory of reality. So, for example, I told you, you're going to get a little lesson here in quantum physics, right? So, for example, there's something that's one of the exciting topics in science is what's called black holes. Okay, now black holes, by the way, the idea is not a new idea. It's pretty much its existence was already and not proven, but predicted by Rebbe Avram. Who's Rebbe Avram? Rebbe Avram Einstein. Rebbe Avram Einstein already, I think his name was Avram, I'm pretty sure. But so Mr. Einstein came up with a way to explain gravity, okay? And he made mathematical models, right, to explain how the gravity works, right? So at this velocity, there's going to be this gravity, and et cetera, right? If you're near, let's say, a mass, right, that can also affect other things, time, space, and so on and so forth. The further from the mass, the less it's going to have an effect on your perception of time and space. Okay, whatever. I'm not going to explain that because I'll make a fool out of myself. But the bottom line is that if you take the math that explains his theory, right, which was created to explain certain phenomenon that we see how planets orbit around the sun, the moon orbits around, So if you take, there's a math that will explain it all. I mean, most of this math was already developed by Newton. Okay, I'm not going to say Reb Newton because he wasn't Jewish, but there's a math, right, that explains. So and what did Albert Einstein do? He took it to another level, right? So that math predicts a black hole, right? That black hole, right, has not been observed, but what we do observe is the effects of the black hole. So we see the effect, we theorize that there must be something called the black hole that explains what's going on in the region of the black hole. Okay. Now already we're getting much closer. The theory is already to the point where it's perhaps not even a theory anymore. It's already, it's accepted as a real. I mean, there may be some fringe theoretical physicists who maybe say that no, black holes don't exist. I mean, they're probably out there, but for the most part, this becomes the reality. My point is that we make observations and we create a math and to explain it. Now, once we start playing with math, we're dealing with abstractions, right? And one of the things that you could do in the abstract world of math is that you could create new dimensions. Okay? So I'm going to come back to this, but I don't want to stray too much away from the topic of neshama. Okay? The neshama is a dimension. Okay? And I'm going to use the Kuzari because this is mentioned in Hasidus. The Kuzari was one of the great Jewish philosophers, we'll call him, whatever, accepted amongst all Jews, right? And the Kuzari writes about the reality of the world, the physical reality. We can, by using a process of what's called reductionism, which is what most science is based on, right? It's all reductionism, to reduce something to its most fundamental element, right? So like in chemistry, we have the chart of the elements, right? What are the elements? That's taking everything that we see and reducing it to a list of basic fundamental, chemical states, right? Then you start mixing them, and you're creating molecules that include, atoms of this element and so on and so forth, right? But break it down, it's called, scientific reductionism. Quantum physics, again, is another taking reductionism to the next level. So, in the times of the Kuzari, scientific reductionism was at the point where they looked at the world and they saw that there are four basic elements of not the four basic elements of Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afar, fire, water, whatever. That's something else. But when we look around, we see that there are different degrees of life. Okay. There are some creatures that don't seem to have any life. And then there's other creatures that seem to have a much more advanced level of life, chayus, right? So, taking the reductionist approach, we boil it down to 4 levels. Doimein is the inanimate, earth, rocks, right? These are things that don't seem to have any life at all. Okay? According to the Arizal, quoted by the Alter Rebbe, first parak of Shaykh V'Amuna, it does have a life. Its life is its very existence. The fact there's a force that's keeping it in existence. Okay, we don't really see that force, but it's existing. So there's something there, but it's not like Lebedik. It's not the life as we like to describe life. Next comes what's called the Tzomeach. The Tzomeach is vegetation. There you see life, grows, there's movement, right? Movement is an indication of life. So when you see that vegetation is growing and changing, and then at some point it actually starts going backwards and it starts rotting, right? Not so with, say, a rock, but that movement towards higher level, more life, less life, that's all just an indication that there's life going on over here, right? I've told the story of one of my friends who never came a minute late to Seder, right? 7:30, he was always in his place. I don't think he ever missed a day. He was like a clock, right? He was always by Seder. One day, the mashpia calls him over and he starts reprimanding him. He says, what is this? Every day, like, what are you, a robot? He said, where's life? I don't see any life, right? You're like a clock. You move like a clock. Does anybody think that a clock has life? No, it's a robot, right? He says, usually if somebody would come late, so he would get a knas. A knas means he gets a fine, and you would have to maybe learn some Tanya Balpeh or whatever. I got plenty of those, by the way. All the Tanya Balpeh that I know is Baruch Hashem, because I wasn't so punctual about coming to Seder. This is in Morristown with Rabbi Tzvi. So, yeah, I learned Perek Mem Aleph. I learned the first 3 prakim of Satshuva. I'm telling you, it paid to not come because it forced me to learn some Tanya about that. But in any case, this guy never had to learn anything from Tanya, right? So the Melech, who was the Mashpia, he calls him over. He says, "What's it? Du lebst nicht, du lebst nicht. Are you alive? I mean, maybe you're a robot. Let me see. Let me check. Let me feel your heart. Is there a beat there? Right?" He says, "Ich will das schon get my class. I want to give you a fine to learn a Perek Tanya." He says, "You know what? Learn a Perek Tanya as a fine for being a robot and not a live person." Okay, so movement, whether it's up or down, whether it's coming early to say there or coming late to say there, it's all a sign of life. Okay, so this is your next level of when we observe life in our environment. Go to the next level, and that's called chai. That's animal life. Okay, animal life is a more developed, more intricate form of life than plants and vegetation. So that's why they get their own category. And this reductionism of putting things into clear, into kind of like a hierarchy of life. Now, what's going to come after the chai, the animal, is going to be the medaber. Now, this is where Torah is talking, because the scientific reductionism will stop by chai, and they will consider a human being as just being a very, sophisticated form of a chai. Okay, and there's a lot of science to back that up, right? Biology, chemistry, even DNA. I mean, do you know how much DNA we share with other animals? I don't think we share that much with a tomato, although we do share, I think, something, right? There's some DNA there too. But so scientific reductionism takes us only to the point of the animal, right? But then this concept is always mentioned also in Torah, right? But al piteira, we add another dimension. That is called midaber. Now that dimension, by the way, there are scientists that are willing to accept that because it probably warrants its own category because there are so many things about a person that distinguish him from an animal. Okay, it has a lot to do with our consciousness, and it has a lot to do with our decision making and the idea of morality and so on and so forth. Okay, so there are no lions within the lion kingdom that are arguing that the lions that killed the deer are immoral. Okay, it's yeah, I don't think that goes on. I mean, maybe if we understood their language better, but I don't think that that's what's going on. Okay, so even scientists are open to the idea that there is a midaber. Okay, so there you go. You have four categories on ancient reductionism. I say it's ancient, but we still stick to it. Al Piteira. That's a different discussion. But then says the Kuzari, but then there's a fifth level. What's the fifth level? The fifth level is called Ayid. This is the Kuzari. The fifth level is Ayid. Ayid is a category of its own. Okay. The Rebbe asks the Kasha. He says, if there are five categories, why does it say, and even the Kuzari says there's four categories, and then there's Ayid? So if there's five categories, right? So the answer is that this fifth category is not based on a dimension that we can scientifically point our finger to. It's based on a different dimension, right? So being that it's based on a completely, totally different dimension, it doesn't fit into the group, this set of four. So there's four, and then there's another one, right? In the words, and I don't know if these are the words of the Kuzari, but this is the way I read it in a minor, that the four, starting with the inanimate, working up to the animal, and then to even people, this is what's called b'cheik hanivra. This is within the realm of what is created. The Yid doesn't fit into that set because what's making him unique is his neshama, and his neshama is not what's called b'cheik hanivra. It's not in the realm of that which is created, but rather it's in b'cheik haboire. It exists in the realm of the creator. Okay, these are the words. Again, I'm not sure if this is an exact quote from the Kuzari, but those are the words that are used where, I mean, I know the Kuzari from the minor, not because I studied the Kuzari. I mean, I've looked at it and I've skimmed through it, but okay. There's another dimension here, right? But it's a dimension that exists because to say a Yid is unique, there are so many things that are observable that are going to lead you to that conclusion. Okay, and I'll admit it might not be an absolute conclusion because unfortunately the word absolute is something that is used in science as far as making conclusions of reality, right? But when we observe certain things and we have that emuna that there's something beyond the Chek HaNivra, the reality of that which is created. So that explains certain unique things about a Yid, and we attribute it to this other dimension. Especially now, after what happened in Eretz Yisrael and the stories that are coming out, right? Can you build a scientific thesis on it? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe not. But we choose to look at a Yid as being unique, and all of these stories that we are hearing, they all support it. They support it. Do they prove it? Maybe. To me, I would say yes, it does. But maybe others will say it doesn't. Okay, fine. But it evidently supports it, makes it easier to believe that there's something unique with the Yid, based on the observable behavior and the things that you're able to actually, point at and show. Okay. So this is the neshama. The neshama is another dimension. but it's a dimension that doesn't fit into the regular dimensions. So let me give you a model back to quantum physics and reductionism that basically is based on mathematical dimensions, right? That by definition could almost not be proven. Can't be proven. They can be imagined. That's what's amazing about the human mind. It's I mean, this is my argument is that consciousness is such that it could even there's levels of consciousness that it transcends even the consciousness because it's able to observe consciousness. Okay. I have way too much time to waste. Well, but I just yesterday came across because some great philosopher just passed away. I don't even remember his name, and he wrote a book. And basically, the book well, is he has this imaginary situation where he was called by the CIA to what's it called to do a very dangerous mission, and the mission could be very dangerous too. There was radioactivity that doesn't affect the body; it only affects the brain, right? so, so his brain. So they sever the brain, and every single contact that the brain has with the rest of the nervous system and the body and everything else, they attach these tiny, tiny little radio receivers. So you're able to put the brain here, and you put the person here. The brain is actually remote, right? But the sensors to the brain are through radio wave, right? So like I could be in San Francisco, but I perceive myself being in San Francisco, but my brain is in New York. Get it? This is whatever. It's imaginary, but this. So the way the storyline was that he decides the brain is sitting in a place, right, in some vault or whatever. The brain is there, right? So can you go, right? Your body is in San Francisco. You think you're in San Francisco because that's what your brain is thinking. Because all the signals that you're picking up that tell you where you are, right? I'm here in this room because I recognize the room, right? And I'm in this room. That's my brain thinking. But it's my brain thinking that I'm somewhere else, right? My brain is thinking about where the signals are coming to it, right? It's the idea is that you could literally separate consciousness from the person, right? And to the point that part of his tale that he's telling, right? He wrote a book, right? And it's based on this imaginary thing that's going on where he had to separate his brain and they were able to somehow connect the brain with the radio waves, right? To every nerve ending and so on and so forth. So could he in San Francisco decide I'm going to go travel to New York, right? And when I come to New York, I'm going to look at my brain. I'm going to go to where it's being held, and I'm looking at my brain. So my brain is looking at my brain, basically, right? Anyway, all of this, and I just saw this, I think, yesterday. And what is it telling me? It's telling me, well, one second, we know that consciousness, what's called dualism, right? There's the body and then there's consciousness, and the consciousness is not emergent from the body. Consciousness exists independent of the body, right? So it's an amazing thing. It's just like when you just stop and you think about it, right? It's just amazing. Okay. So, but if you're a theoretical physicist and you live in these realities, right? And these realities, they don't conform to anything. There's no experiment that you can even make, to prove it, right? So this is by the way, what I'm going to is the same area in theoretical physics that says that there are multiverses. There's not just one universe, there are infinite universes. We're just, right? And every minute and every second, because of the quantum fluctuations, right? of quantum particles, they are splitting into infinite different realities, right? Every second, right? Well, not every second, just whatever. I'm not sure exactly how you break down the time. That's another area of reductionism, right? About like how little can you go, right? Whatever. Again, that's another example of mathematics creating a reality. Because there was a German scientist. His name was Planck. Now, what did Planck do? Planck wanted to deal with what's called the ultraviolet catastrophe. Again, I'm not going to get into it, but it has to do with black bodies and so on and so forth. And the problem is that the math that describes this, very similar to the math of a black hole, right? um, went to some absurd place. Like it went out of reality because it led to an infinite state, right? And how do you deal with that? Well, science is about observing what we observe. It's not about, but once you start getting to infinite. So what did he do? He came up explaining how the different shades of light that we see are based on the frequency, right? So we think of frequency as going on a smooth line from this level, or whatever, that would be one side of the spectrum, which is the ultraviolet, to the other side, which is, well, I don't know, what is it, it's the X-ray or whatever. And it seems it's like going on a smooth path. So he decided, no, there's a point where it ends. Why? Because it doesn't go on a smooth level. It goes in steps. It goes in increments. And any given frequency could only be at that level, and it goes to the next level because it goes incrementally to a different level, meaning that there's a point at which it's at its smallest incremental point. And he measured it in his mind using math, and he came up with what's called the Planck something, right, which is the smallest possible frequency, right? And that takes care of all of the issues that we're having with ultraviolet, the ultraviolet catastrophe as it became known. Then Rebbe Avraham Einstein took it to another level, and he applied it not just to frequency, right, but he applied it to light. And then he came up with this idea that there's such a thing called a photon. A photon is a particle of light. You don't think of light as being particles, right? It turns out that the crazy thing about light is that it's both particles and it's a wave, but that's a whole different story, okay? My point is for this year is to tell you that here we have absolute models in science where you create these things that could be mathematically written down, right? Not observable at all, not testable in a lab. Maybe it will be at some point. That's fine. They're certainly trying, right? But for the moment, not. But it becomes the basis of a whole way of thinking. So there's this thing called, when you talk about reductionism, right? So we went from the chemical reductionism, which is based on the elements, right? But then the elements itself are atoms, right? So what's making up the atom? Okay, so we reduce it to what? To protons and neutrons, and then there's the electron, right? But then we took it a step further, and we started taking apart even the proton and the neutron and all these things, right? And what do we come up with? There's quarks and there's neutrinos and there's whatever, right? So they pretty much think that they got to the end because the model that they have, it's always referred to as the best scientific theory ever. Because in order to explain reality, this model, right, this new table of elements, but it's way less than just the elements. Elements are basically molecular. That's molecules. Now we're going like down to not just the atom, but even like taking apart the atom, and having this table of whatever, right, explains everything almost. Not everything, right? Almost, right? There's still a couple of things that are unexplained, but it's better than any other explanation that science has come up with. So it's considered to be the best theory of science ever. It's been tested a billion times and measured a billion times and applied a million times, and everything, all of the predictions are all the experimentation is confirming, that this is the basics of it. But for the few things that it doesn't, what's a scientist going to do? He's going to go to a next level of reductionism, right? He's going to break it down even more. So now we have a thing called string theory, that even the quarks within the neutron, within the atom, within the chemical, whatever, right, is actually these it's just vibrating strings of energy. There's only one thing. There's a certain kind of energy. I don't even know what kind of energy it is. And it vibrates. And based on the vibration, right, that is what creates all the different particles within quantum physics, right? So what are we? What's reality? Reality are these vibrating strings of energy. But in order for those vibrating strings of energy to result in what we could observe, they have to be vibrating in more than three, or throw in the other one, the fourth, time, space, time, right? It needs more. It needs more dimensions, right? You can't see these dimensions. By definition, we don't have the tools to measure those dimensions. But we can mathematically create them. And if there were 6 more dimensions, look at that. We're going from 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, and finally, this theory has to create mathematically another 6 dimensions, which Michal from Ask Noah, he says, now isn't that interesting? Like 10, why 10? 10 is an arbitrary number, scientifically speaking. It's not arbitrary to us, because we know when Hashem created the world, he made the number 10 be very fundamental, right? Reductionism, it's all gets reduced to 10 spheres, right? 10 spheres, and with the emphasis 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. So here you have something that's not even proving anything, but it's supporting. Wow. So Michal, what's Michal's last name? Michal
Shulman.
Michal
Shulman.
Shulman. Michal Shulman. So he says, wow. And then another thing, there was some Jewish guy who, because there were still some issues with what's it called, he says, yeah, there's an 11th dimension also, but it's not one of the 10. It's another kind of a dimension, 11th dimension. Wow. We all know about that. We know about 10 spheres, so that is the number that defines the Olam HaTikun, right? But then you have the Olam HaToyu. What's different about the Olam HaTikun and Olam HaToyu is that Olam HaToyu has an 11th dimension, okay? It's an 11th dimension. There's the Maimer of Yud Aleph Nisan. The Rebbe was born on the 11th of Nisan, and the Rebbe speaks about this 11th dimension, right, in Olam HaToyu. And Chol Shulman, comes to Shul, he's all excited. This it was actually Jewish. I think he also passed away just recently. With a W was the beginning of his last name. I forget, whatever. My point is, we're learning at Tanya that there's another dimension to a Jew. Okay, and because it's important to also speak about what that dimension does for us in our Avodas Hashem, I'll talk about that too. But everything I said up until now is, look, here's science willing to create new dimensions to explain phenomenon, right? Interestingly, the math only works if there's 6 more dimensions, right? And there are some really true believers in this, right? Certain, you know what I mean? There are some physicists who say that this is just whatever, this is not science. But there's quite a few, there's a whole, school of thought out there that literally is trying to advocate for this what's called this theory, this string theory. Okay, so I look at it and I say, thank you. You just helped me understand what the Alter Rebbe is telling us in time. What does Alter Rebbe tell us in time? He says, we're human beings, right? And I'm going to just say this shortly because this is a big theme of the last few prakim of Tanya. He says, we are human beings, okay? We as human beings, right, we are primarily functioning with our physical consciousness, we'll call it, okay? It's not actually physical, but it's the level of consciousness that somehow found a way to connect to physical bodies, perceive physical reality, see it in a really confined state, which we call whatever, the cosmos, whatever, right? Where does the Alter Rebbe use it? So just recently, last week in Tanya, there's a line. What does the Alter Rebbe tell us in this line? The Alter Rebbe tells us, well, you know what, let me go back to Perik Ben Beis first, okay? The Alter Rebbe tells us that, serving Hashem means that you have to have what's called Abbas Hashem. But here the Alter Rebbe says, I want to address Yiras Hashem. Yiras Hashem means you have to have this conscious state of awe of Hashem. Right. Now, is that easy? Doesn't seem to be easy. And that's where the Gemara actually challenges Moshe Rabbeinu, who got frustrated with the Yidden because, what's your problem? Can't you have some yira? That's all Hashem wants, that you should have some fear, so that when you do something, you see the consequences. You see that you're disappointing Hashem. That's what the fear is. You fear, I don't want to do something wrong, chas v'shalom. This is too precious to me. This is too real to me. I don't want to ruin it, right? That's what Yiras Hashem is. But then here, from the very beginning, in the Midbar, Moshe Rabbeinu was noticing that they're struggling with Yiras Hashem. And he says it with frustration, right? So the Gemara says, Moshe Rabbeinu, what right do you have to be so frustrated, right? And the Gemara answers, Moshe had a right to be frustrated because he saw a different dimension in a Yid, right? The dimension is called the Moshe Rabbeinu dimension. So Moshe is saying, listen, the struggle is a direct result of your not wanting to acknowledge and to accept that dimension. The minute you accept that dimension, guess what's going to happen? It's going to become natural. The Yira is going to be natural, just like we expect that Yiras Hashem should be natural to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was also a human being, right? But Moshe Rabbeinu, to him, it was natural. The rest of Yidden, it didn't seem to be very natural. Moshe says, because you're not acknowledging that other dimension. What is that a dimension? The same dimension that I have. I'm not any different than you. Hashem wanted that there should be a process, that it shouldn't be obvious to us. We have to acknowledge it, okay? Now, since it's somewhat dependent on how much we're going to acknowledge it, right? This other dimension. So you can expect that we're going to just acknowledge it, and then we're going to be talking Moshe Rabbeinu's without a Yetzer Hara anymore. No, it doesn't work that way. The process of acknowledging it, right, is that's a given. That process has to be there, right? In the process, there can be a lot of frustration, right? So what did the Alter Rebbe tell us? He said, I'm going to give you these models that will help you consciously connect with that dimension, with that special dimension, right, that's harbored by your Jewish soul. And the Alter Rebbe goes through, a couple prakim of helping us develop that yira, which is all based on what? Acknowledging that dimension that we already have. Last week, the Alter Rebbe addressed the guy who's frustrated. Says, okay, I know it's there. I'm working, right? And I think I got to a certain level. But you know what? I'm not sure that it's real. Maybe I'm just fooling myself. Says the Alter Rebbe, we learned this last week in time. Even if it seems to you that this is just your imagination, says the Alter Rebbe, Al Yochush. I don't get down because of that. Because I'm telling you, it's emes la'amitay. It's absolute truth. And it's an avodah tama or avodah shlema, I think the Alter Rebbe says. It's a perfect avodah. Was it the level of Moshe Rabbeinu? No. But it's based on that core element, which is one with Moshe Rabbeinu. So the way it manifests itself and expresses itself may be somewhat not so perfect, okay? It does not change the fact that it is rooted in that absolute dimension that you have. So therefore, even though it may manifest itself in a less than perfect way, says the Alter Rebbe, the fact that it's rooted in that element, in that dimension, it is perfect, regardless of what it might look like. There's something more there than what just appears to the eye, knowing where it's coming from. This is an amazing nekuda, such an amazing nekuda. And again, if you're into quantum physics, it's supported, right? There's dimensions, okay, and those dimensions will explain a lot of things. Right? We can't prove it, but it explains a lot of things. This, the Alter Rebbe, is basically the Alter Rebbe uses it to explain in Perek Yud Ches of Tanya, how is it possible that a Yid who basically lives a lifestyle that is void of Torah, void of mitzvahs, right? But he knows he's Jewish. And although this might be anecdotal, but it does demonstrate something if you choose to look at it at the right way. Now, the Rebbe says there's so much anecdotal evidence, right? So maybe that's a contradiction in term, but there are so many things that we could observe, right? That are only explainable, right, by that dimension. And one of them, the Alter Rebbe says, we have so many instances where the Jew who did not even live a life according to Torah and Mitzvahs was willing to sacrifice his life for Kedushas Hashem, for the sanctity of Hashem. Where does that come from? Does it come from his background? It doesn't come from his education, right? Doesn't come from because somebody brainwashed him, right? Because if that's the case, he would have been behaving differently yesterday, right? It's one of the amazing messages from this crazy tragedy that happened in Eretz Yisrael. It's like most of the tragedy happened with people who were doing something that was so not in the spirit of Yiddishkeit, right? And yet, look at the level of awareness that it brought, right? In many instances, like I say, it might be anecdotal, but anecdotal is an indication of something. If you choose to believe it, well, I choose to believe that so many of these stories that are coming out from that tragedy, that are basically stories that are testifying to some other dimension that's there. It's absolute, regardless of how you would have evaluated and assessed that person the day before, on October 6th. The Hershel. So this is what the Nekuda of from Perek Mem Aleph and on, Mem Hey, Mem Vav, right? I mean, I can go through many different things. When I learned Tanya years ago, doing chitas, I made up my mind that I'm what's it called, that there are lines that I'm gonna like kind of drill them into my head, right? And just recently we had another one of these lines that I was sitting on a plane and I'm learning chitas. I said, okay, this line has to become embedded in my, last week we had the minor of B'Hadarta B'Fnei Zoten, where the Alter Rebbe speaks about the value of having certain things of Torah, not you just learn it, you embed it into your brain, okay? You memorize them, right? So there's lines, there's little, right? And even if his heart is like a stone, right? If he'll just be misbrained and he'll stop and think about the love that Hashem is showing him, your heart will melt, right? And it will melt, right? You pour out your soul with love, right? These lines, they're all lines that have to do with the fact that a Yid is very unique because he possesses another dimension, a dimension that transcends the dimensions of this of the physical, of the cosmos, the physical world, right? And it explains so much about the uniqueness of a Yid. Anyway, good Shabbos. And I wish everybody happy results based on this dimension.